My husband had been sick for years, a mystery illness the doctors couldn't solve. His mother, my mother-in-law, was my saint, my rock, my partner in his care. But one day, sitting exhausted in a hospital hallway, I overheard two doctors whispering his name. "It's not a disease," one of them said. "It's a poison, and the person giving it to him is in this room." Before we get into the details, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of my nightmare. My life for the past 2 years had been a calendar of symptoms. I kept a detailed journal. Monday, nausea, fatigue. Tuesday, joint pain, dizziness. Wednesday, a good day. My husband, my strong, vibrant, loving Michael, was fading away before my very eyes, consumed by a mysterious illness that had baffled every doctor we had seen. He had been forced to give up his job, his hobbies, his life. Our world had shrunk to the four walls of our bedroom, a quiet, sterile space that had become the headquarters for our long and losing war against an enemy we could not name. My only partner in this war, my one true ally, was my mother-in-law, Agnes. She was a saint. From the day Michael had first gotten sick, she had been a constant, unwavering presence in our lives. She would come over every single morning, her face a perfect portrait of maternal concern, always carrying something to help. "I brought my special herbal tea, Claire, dear," she would say, bustling into our kitchen. "It's an old family recipe, full of antioxidants. It will help with the inflammation." Or, "I cooked up a batch of my nutrient broth. He needs to keep his strength up, and this is easier for him to digest than solid food." She was wonderful. She would sit with him for hours so I could run errands. She would manage his complex schedule of medications. She would hold me when I would break down in tears of sheer exhaustion and despair. "We will get through this together," she would whisper, stroking my hair. A mother's love is a powerful thing. Michael, for his part, adored her. He was her only son, and their bond was incredibly close. Some days it seemed her presence was the only thing that brought a flicker of the old light back into his tired eyes. He would drink her special teas and eat her homemade broths without complaint, trusting her implicitly. We both did. She was our rock. But nothing was working. In fact, he was getting worse. The good days were becoming rarer, the bad days a deeper, darker shade of gray. Our last hope was a new specialist, a top diagnostician at the city's best hospital, a man renowned for solving impossible medical mysteries. The day of our appointment, I was a bundle of raw, nervous hope. This was it. This was the day we would finally get an answer. We sat in the sterile, quiet waiting room, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and the unspoken fears of a dozen other families. Agnes, of course, was with us, her hand resting comfortably on my shoulder. The doctor, a kind man with sharp, intelligent eyes, ran a new, exhaustive battery of tests on Michael. He drew vial after vial of blood. He ran scans. He asked 1,000 questions about his diet, his environment, his symptoms. After hours of waiting, he finally called Agnes and me into his private office. His face was grim. The flicker of hope in my chest began to die. "Mrs. Miller," he began, looking at me, "I've reviewed all of Michael's tests, the old ones and the new ones, and I have to be honest with you. Nothing adds up. His symptoms are all over the place. His blood work is a complete contradiction. None of it aligns with any known autoimmune disorder, neurological condition, or disease." "So, what is it, doctor?" I asked, my voice a desperate whisper. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, a look of profound, frustrated puzzlement on his face. "I don't know," he admitted. "But there is something, a severe and unexplained toxicity in his blood work. The markers for heavy metal contamination, specifically arsenic, are elevated, but in a strange, fluctuating pattern I have never seen before. It's not an acute dose, it's chronic. someone or something in his daily environment is slowly, methodically poisoning him. The word, poisoning, it hung in the air, a monstrous, impossible thing. My mind immediately went to environmental factors. Our old house, the water. The doctor must have seen the frantic, terrified questions in my eyes. He stood up and walked to the door of his office. "I need to speak with both of you separately," he said, his expression now unreadable. "There are some delicate questions I need to ask about his home environment, his daily routine, his diet." A new flicker of hope ignited in my chest. A lead. A real, tangible clue. We were finally on the verge of a diagnosis, a real answer that could save my husband's life. I had no idea that we were actually on the verge of an interrogation. I had no idea that the doctor's delicate questions were about to turn my entire world into a crime scene, and that the kind, loving woman who was my greatest ally was actually my husband's most dangerous enemy. The doctor's words, slowly, methodically poisoning him, echoed in the sterile silence of his office, a monstrous, unthinkable pronouncement that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I looked at my mother-in-law, Agnes, expecting to see my own horror reflected in her face. Instead, I saw a mask of profound, maternal grief, her eyes welling with perfect, crystalline tears. She was, as always, a pillar of strength. "Whatever it takes, doctor," she had said, her voice trembling with a flawless performance of a heartbroken mother. "Whatever you need from us, we will find out what is doing this to my son." The doctor had decided to interview her first. I waited in the hallway, my mind a frantic, chaotic storm. Poison. The word was a serpent coiling around every mundane detail of our lives. Was it the old pipes in our house? The pesticides used in the park where we walked? My mind raced through 100 innocent possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. When Agnes emerged from the office 20 minutes later, her face was a portrait of composed sorrow. "He asked about everything," she whispered, taking my hand, her own hand surprisingly cold. "I told him everything I could remember. Now it's your turn, dear. Be strong." My own interview was a blur of questions that now felt like accusations. I recounted, in painstaking detail, our daily routine. I spoke of the filtered water we used, the organic food I bought. And then I spoke of Agnes. I told the doctor with a sense of profound gratitude in my voice about her unwavering support. I told him about the special, nutrient-rich broths that she would bring every day, the herbal teas she insisted were the only thing that soothed his stomach, the complex array of vitamins and supplements she personally administered to him each morning. "She's been a lifesaver," I had told the doctor. "I don't know what I would have done without her. She manages his entire diet." I had intended my words as a tribute to her love. I had no idea I was, in fact, delivering a detailed confession on her behalf. The doctor had just listened, his expression unreadable, and had sent us home with an order for more tests and a vague warning to be extra vigilant about Michael's diet. The drive home was a tense, silent affair, but the diagnosis, as terrible as it was, seemed to galvanize Agnes. She was no longer just a supportive mother-in-law, she became a fierce, almost fanatical guardian of my husband's health. "We can't trust anything anymore, Claire," she had declared that evening, her voice full of a new, steely authority as she marched into my kitchen and began to empty our pantry. "The poison could be anywhere, in the spices, in the packaged foods. From now on," she had announced, "I will be preparing all of Michael's meals myself, here, with ingredients I source from a private farm I trust. We cannot take any more chances." My silent sacrifice began in earnest that day. It was the sacrifice of my own autonomy in my own home. My kitchen was no longer my own. It became Agnes's territory. She would arrive every morning with sealed containers of her own food, and she would watch, her eyes like a hawk, as Michael ate, ensuring he didn't touch a single thing she hadn't personally prepared. My own attempts to cook for him were met with a gentle but firm refusal. "It's for the best, dear," she would say, moving my plate aside. "We can't be too careful." I accepted it all. I told myself it was for Michael. I told myself her obsessive control was a manifestation of her love, her fear. But a tiny traitorous seed of unease had been planted in my mind, and it began to grow, its roots snaking through the cracks in my own denial. I started to notice small, strange things. I noticed that Michael's bad days, the days when his nausea and dizziness were at their worst, often seemed to follow a morning when he had had a particularly large serving of his mother's special strength-building broth. I noticed the way she would always insist on washing his specific teacup herself, a cup he was not allowed to drink anything else from. The most chilling incident came about a month later. I had spent the afternoon making Michael a simple, plain chicken soup, using only bottled water and organic ingredients I had bought from a trusted store. He had had 2 bowls, and for the first time in weeks, he had seemed better. The color had returned to his cheeks. He had smiled a real, genuine smile. That evening, Agnes had arrived. She had seen the leftover soup on the stove. "Oh, you cooked for him," she had said, her voice a little too bright. "How lovely." The next morning, I went to the fridge to get him another bowl of the soup. It was gone. The entire pot had vanished. When I asked Agnes about it, she had waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honey, it smelled a little off this morning. I didn't want to take any chances. I threw it out. Don't worry, I've brought him his usual broth." I stood there in my own kitchen, a cold dread washing over me. The soup had not been off. It had been the one thing that had made him feel better, and she had thrown it away. But what could I do? What could I say? To accuse her, to even voice my suspicion would be to declare war on the woman my husband adored, the woman who was, by all outward appearances, a saint. It would be a monstrous, unforgivable accusation based on nothing more than a gut feeling and a few strange coincidences. And so, I did what I had always done. I sacrificed my own intuition. I stayed silent. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my grief and my fear were making me see monsters in the shadows. I had no idea that the monster was not in the shadows. She was standing right in front of me, in the bright, cheerful light of my own kitchen, holding a steaming mug of her special, loving, and slow-acting poison. And my husband's condition was about to take a sudden, terrifying, and near-fatal turn for the worse. The quiet, domestic war of attrition continued for another 2 months. I lived my life on eggshells, a polite, smiling stranger in my own home. I watched my mother-in-law, Agnes, with a new, terrifying clarity. I watched her meticulously prepare my husband Michael's special meals, her movements precise and proprietary. I watched the way she would subtly dispose of any food I tried to make for him. I watched the way Michael, my loving, trusting husband, would look at her with such profound, unwavering faith, a faith that was, I now knew, slowly and methodically killing him. My silence was a heavy, suffocating cloak. I had no proof, only a series of dark, terrifying suspicions that felt too monstrous to even speak aloud. To accuse her would be to declare war, to shatter my husband's heart, and to risk being branded as a hysterical, paranoid wife. The crisis, when it came, was sudden and catastrophic. It was a Saturday morning. Agnes had arrived earlier than usual, carrying a large thermos of her extra-strength restorative broth. "He had a bad night," she had said, her face a perfect mask of maternal concern. "He needs this to build back his energy." She had poured a large mug for him, and I had watched, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest, as he had drunk every last drop. An hour later, he collapsed.
One moment he was sitting up in bed trying to read the morning paper, and the next, his body was racked with a violent, terrifying convulsion. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a terrible, gurgling sound came from his throat. The scream that tore from my own throat was a sound of pure, primal terror. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a surreal, disjointed nightmare. I sat in the back, holding my husband's cold, limp hand, while Agnes, in the front seat, gave a flawless performance of a terrified, hysterical mother. But through her sobs, I saw her eyes. And they were not the eyes of a grieving woman. They were cold and hard and calculating. At the hospital, Michael was rushed into the intensive care unit. Agnes and I were left in the sterile, silent waiting room, a place that had become a horrifyingly familiar second home to me. It's those environmental toxins. I told you it wasn't safe for him. We have to get him out of there. She was already spinning the narrative, planting the seeds of a story that would, as always, place her at the center as the sole, heroic protector of her son's health. After what felt like an eternity, the specialist, the kind doctor who had first mentioned the word poison, came out to speak to us. His face was grim. "He's stable for now," he said, his voice low. "We've managed to get the seizures under control, but he is in critical condition. His system is being overwhelmed by something. We've sent a new, extensive toxicology panel to the lab and rushed the results." He looked at us, his eyes full of a deep, professional gravity. "I need to be honest with you. We are no longer just treating an unknown illness. We are now actively investigating a potential criminal act."
He then walked a short distance down the hallway to confer with another senior physician who had just arrived. I needed to escape. I needed to get away from the suffocating, cloying scent of my mother-in-law's perfume and the quiet, insidious hum of her lies. I stood up, murmuring something about needing to get a coffee, and I walked down the same hallway, my own thoughts a screaming chaos. I was just around the corner from them, out of their line of sight, when I heard them. The two doctors. Their voices were low, urgent, and they were talking about my husband. I froze, pressing myself back against the cold, sterile wall. "The results from the new toxicology panel on Michael Miller are back," I heard the first doctor, our specialist, say. "It's just as we suspected, but so much worse. The levels of chronic arsenic poisoning are off the charts. The dose he was given this morning was massive. It was a deliberate attempt to induce cardiac arrest." "My God," the second doctor replied. "So it's a confirmed Munchausen by proxy case. The caregiver is the perpetrator." "It has to be," our doctor said, his voice full of a weary, frustrated anger. "This is not a disease. It is a poison, a slow, methodical, and now an escalated poisoning. And the person giving it to him—" He paused, and his next words were the ones that would end my old life and begin my new one. "Has to be one of the two women who are with him every single day, the wife or the mother. It is a classic and horrifying domestic poisoning." The second doctor's voice was grim. "The mother is the one who, according to the wife's own testimony, controls his entire diet. She was with him all morning. We have to assume it's her. We need to alert hospital security and contact the police now." The world went silent. My own breath was a ragged, painful thing in my chest. My suspicions, my fears, my gut feelings, they were not paranoia. They were the truth. My mother-in-law, the woman I had trusted, the woman my husband adored, was a monster. A cold, calculating monster who had been trying to murder her own son. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. A strange, terrifying, and diamond-hard clarity washed over me. The doctors were calling the police, but I knew my mother-in-law. I knew her ability to lie, to perform, to twist the narrative until she was the victim. A blood test was evidence, yes, but I needed something more. I needed something undeniable. I needed the weapon itself. I peeked around the corner. The doctors were now walking purposefully towards the nurse's station.
And in the waiting room, sitting alone on a hard plastic chair, was my mother-in-law's expensive designer handbag. Agnes herself was gone, likely in the ladies' room, freshening up her performance of the grieving mother. My heart hammering against my ribs, I walked back into the waiting room. The handbag sat there, unguarded. I knew, with an absolute and total certainty, that I had about 60 seconds to find the proof I needed, the proof that would not just convict her, but would save my husband's life. I stood pressed against the cold, sterile wall of the hospital corridor, the doctor's words echoing in my ears, a horrifying, deafening symphony of confirmation. Poison, chronic, Munchausen by proxy, the mother. Every vague suspicion, every gut feeling I had suppressed, every strange coincidence I had dismissed as paranoia, now coalesced into a single, monstrous, and undeniable truth. My mother-in-law, Agnes, the woman who had held my hand and dried my tears, the saint of our family's long tragedy, was not a caregiver. She was a monster.
My mind raced. The doctors were calling the police. But I knew Agnes. I knew her power of performance, her masterful ability to twist a narrative until she was the victim. A blood test was a number on a page. She would create doubt. She would find a way to blame me, the environment, anything. I needed more. I needed something physical. I needed the weapon. I peeked around the corner. The doctors were at the nurses' station, speaking in low, urgent tones. And in the waiting room, sitting alone and unguarded on a hard plastic chair, was her expensive, designer handbag. Agnes herself was gone, the door to the ladies' room just clicking shut. I had a window. It would be small, it would be terrifying, but it would be my only chance. My feet moved before my mind had a chance to object. I walked back into the waiting room, my movements calm and casual, a perfect imitation of a wife simply returning to her vigil. I sat down in the chair next to her purse, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were trembling, but my mind was a shard of ice. I glanced towards the ladies' room door, then towards the nurses' station. No one was looking. With a single, swift, and silent motion, I reached over and pulled her heavy leather handbag onto my lap, shielding it from view with my own body. My fingers fumbled with the clasp. It opened with a soft, expensive click. The inside of the purse was just like her, perfectly organized, everything in its place. A leather wallet, a silver lipstick case, a small monogrammed tin of mints. For a horrifying second, I thought I had been wrong, that I was the one who was crazy. But then, my fingers brushed against it. Tucked away in a small silk-lined side pocket, a pocket designed for a phone or keys, was a small, antique-looking glass vial. It was no bigger than my thumb. It was stoppered with a cork and had a delicate built-in glass dropper. It contained a small amount of a clear, odorless, and slightly viscous liquid. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. My first instinct was to take it, to run to the doctors and scream, "I found it." But I knew that would be a mistake. It would become my word against hers. She would say I planted it. I needed to be smarter. With hands that shook so violently I could barely function, I took out my own phone. I placed the small glass vial on my lap next to her open wallet, clearly showing her identification. I took 3 clear, high-resolution photographs, capturing the vial, its contents, and its location inside her purse. Proof. I then slipped the vial back into the side pocket, exactly as I had found it, just as I heard the sound of the toilet flushing in the nearby restroom. I placed the handbag back on the chair beside me, an inch-perfect recreation of the crime scene, and looked up, my own face a mask of practiced, sorrowful calm, just as the ladies' room door swung open. Agnes walked out, a fresh layer of lipstick applied, her performance mask firmly back in place. She saw me sitting there and gave me a small, sad smile. "Any news, dear?" she asked. "No," I said, my voice a marvel of self-control. "Not yet." She was about to sit down when they arrived.
The two doctors, flanked by two uniformed hospital security guards and two grim-faced plainclothes police detectives, they walked directly into our small waiting area. "Ma'am," the lead detective, a tall man with tired, intelligent eyes, said, his gaze landing on Agnes, "Are you Agnes Miller?" My mother-in-law immediately launched into her greatest performance. Her hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with a mother's terror. "Yes! Is it Michael? Is my son all right?"
Your son's condition is stable, ma'am, the detective said, his voice flat and unimpressed by her theatrics. We need to ask you some questions regarding his medical condition. We have reason to believe that he is the victim of a long-term, deliberate poisoning. Agnes's performance of shock was a masterpiece. She gasped, her body swaying as if she might faint, a gesture so perfectly executed that one of the security guards took a step forward to steady her. "Poisoning?" she cried, her voice a perfect symphony of disbelief and horror. "My God, who would do such a thing? It must be that old house. The pipes. I told Claire we had to—" "We don't believe the source is environmental, ma'am," the detective cut her off, his patience clearly wearing thin. He then turned to me. "Mrs. Miller," he said, and I knew this was my cue. "You mentioned to the doctors that you had a specific immediate concern you wished to share with us." I stood up. I looked directly at my mother-in-law, at the woman who had been slowly, lovingly murdering my husband in front of my very eyes. "Yes, detective," I said, my voice shaking now, not with fear, but with a cold, righteous fury. "I was just admiring my mother-in-law's beautiful handbag. She always carries the most interesting things. And I was just wondering," I said, my eyes locking with hers, "what she keeps in this little glass vial she has in the side pocket." The color, the performance, the life itself seemed to drain out of Agnes's face. She clutched her purse to her chest, her knuckles white, a cornered animal making a final desperate stand to protect her den. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape that wasn't there. "You have no right to search my personal belongings. I demand to speak to my lawyer. You can't just—" The lead detective just smiled, a cold, grim, and utterly final smile. "Ma'am," he said, as the second detective produced a folded, official-looking document, "we already have a warrant." She had been a ghost in my house for 2 years, poisoning my husband, my life, under the very guise of love. Now, in this cold, sterile hospital waiting room, her own poison, the very weapon she had used to destroy him, was about to become the one, undeniable thing that would destroy her. My mother-in-law, Agnes, clutched her designer handbag to her chest as if it were a life raft, her knuckles white, her eyes which had been so full of a masterful, false sympathy just moments before, were now wide with the pure, cornered terror of a predator that has just realized it has stepped into a trap. Her performance was over. The lie was dead. "I demand to speak to my lawyer," she hissed, her voice a thin, reedy thing, all its earlier strength and warmth gone. "You will have every opportunity to do so, ma'am," the lead detective said, his voice calm and unimpressed. He nodded to one of the hospital security guards, a large, stoic woman. "Please retrieve the handbag." Agnes let out a small, pathetic whimper as the guard gently, but firmly, pried the expensive leather bag from her grasp. The guard placed it on the small waiting room table. The detective kneeled down, snapped on a pair of blue latex gloves, and with the methodical slowness of an archaeologist unearthing a cursed relic, he unzipped the main compartment. He pulled out the contents one by one. The leather wallet, the silver lipstick case, the monogrammed tin of mints. And then his gloved fingers dipped into the small silk-lined side pocket.
He pulled out the small, antique glass vial.
He held it up to the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting room. The clear, viscous liquid inside seemed to glow with a malevolent, oily light. "Well, well," the detective murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "What do we have here?" My mother-in-law did not confess. She did not scream. She simply collapsed. Her face went slack, her eyes rolled back in her head, and her body slid from the hard plastic chair onto the floor in a silent, boneless heap. It was her final performance. The frail, shocked old woman, overwhelmed by the stress of it all. But no one was buying it. Not anymore. The aftermath was a blur of quiet, efficient procedures. Agnes was taken to a different part of the hospital under police guard. The vial was sealed in an evidence bag, and I was left to face the most difficult task of my entire life, telling my husband that the mysterious illness that had been slowly, painfully killing him for 2 years was not a disease, it was a crime, and the person responsible was his own mother. I sat by his hospital bed for hours, waiting for him to wake up. I held his hand, and I thought about the sheer, monstrous complexity of the lie she had told. The investigation later uncovered it all from her diaries and computer records. Her motive was not money. It was something far more twisted. It was a possessive, pathological love. She could not bear to see her son, her brilliant, beautiful son, be a strong, independent man who was building a life with another woman. So she had decided, with a cold, terrifying logic, to make him a child again. By keeping him sick, by keeping him weak and dependent, he would always be her little boy. I would be the wife, the nurse, but she would be the one he truly needed. She would be his savior. When Michael finally opened his eyes, I told him the truth. I told him everything, my voice a quiet, steady presence in the hushed, beeping world of the ICU. I told him about the doctors, about the arsenic, about the vial in her purse. I watched as his face went through a storm of emotions. First, a profound, disbelieving confusion, then a wave of sickening, dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep, silent, and utterly heartbreaking grief, as the image of the sainted, loving mother he had adored his entire life was shattered, replaced by the image of a monster. Our vindication was not a single, triumphant moment. It was a long, slow, and arduous journey back to the light. The legal case against Agnes was swift and absolute. Confronted with the irrefutable evidence from the hidden camera we later helped the police to plant, she was convicted and sentenced to a long, quiet stay in a secure psychiatric facility. But our healing was a much slower process. Michael's body began to recover, the poison slowly, painstakingly being flushed from his system, but the poison in his heart, the poison of his mother's ultimate betrayal, was a much deeper wound. There were days of rage, of grief, of a profound, questioning sadness, and I was there for all of it. We held on to each other, two survivors in the wreckage of a life we had thought was perfect. Our love, which had been tested by a silent, creeping horror, was now being reforged in the fires of a shared, brutal truth. It became something stronger, more honest, and more real than it had ever been before. It's been 2 years now. We sold the old house, with all its beautiful, tainted memories. We live in a smaller, simpler home now, a place filled with light and laughter. Michael is not the same man he was before the illness. The poison left its scars. He walks with a slight limp, and his energy is not what it once was, but he is alive. He is here. He is whole. I watched him this morning out in our small backyard, teaching our son how to throw a baseball. The sun was warm on his face, and he was laughing. A real, genuine, and beautiful laugh, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I had walked into a beautiful life that was secretly a house of horrors. And I had walked out, not unscathed, but with the one thing that truly mattered. I had my husband.
I had my family, and we had survived. An absolutely chilling story of the ultimate betrayal and a wife's incredible strength in the face of a monster. What a powerful journey from suspicion to salvation. What do you think was the most shocking moment? Let us know in the comments below. If this unbelievable story had you on the edge of your seat, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and suspenseful stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.